My name's Katherine Trebeck. I'm a senior researcher for OXFAM GB, and I'm looking at how we can create an economy that delivers social justice at the same time as respecting planetary boundaries. We have an economic model and a political system that is set up to deliver more and more gross domestic product, and yet we know GDP is such a flawed measure of progress, and it's taking us a million miles away from the world that we really want. So at the top level, we really need to change the purpose, the goal of our economic system. And if we do that, then we can have a much more interesting and productive conversation about how we distribute the economic activity, how resources are shared, what sorts of economic activity we have. So is it sort of businesses that are sustainable and are green and are providing good jobs, or is it businesses that are just extracting from communities and polluting? But if we get the purpose right, all those other purposes, all those other questions fall into place a lot more easily, and we can enable the sort of economic system that we really need to see to survive into the next century. Yeah, so I've had, I guess, a couple of roles. I guess the main formal ones have been sitting on a panel in one of the big sessions in the auditorium this morning, talking about trade and the SDGs and the Paris COP and local economies. Then I was a part of a working session, so a similar theme, but then breaking it down to action. I've also been trying to support a little bit an amazing group from the link to the Club of Rome of young student activists who are working to change the economics curricula across the world, called Reclaim Economics. So a few of those representatives are here too, so I'm helping to connect them as best I can to people that they'd like to talk to. So I did a piece of work in Scotland many years ago where we asked whose economy is this, who is winning and who is losing out of the nature of the economic model in Scotland. And we saw really clearly that after several decades of economic growth in GDP terms, things like poverty rates hadn't really budged, health inequalities were getting worse, people were feeling more stressed with their lives, they weren't feeling in control, their jobs were becoming more precarious, and there was a huge disconnect between this fairly consistent economic growth and basically the quality of people's lives. And so we said, well, our policymakers are pursuing the wrong thing. They're focusing on GDP growth rather than the things that really matter to make people's lives good and healthy and sustainable and fulfilling. And so we said, well, we need a different measure of progress. And so we went out and asked people across Scotland, but particularly people from the most deprived parts of Scotland, saying to them, what is it that you need to live well in their community? And we had lots of different mixed methods, and we added it all up and came up with a new index, a new measure of prosperity for Scotland called the Humankind Index. But in a way, that's just a tool to have a different conversation about the sort of economy we need. So I've entered this sort of wider space through the Beyond GDP movement, through the alternative measures of progress movement. So that's how I've got into it. And that's why I try to keep the focus on really what is it our whole economy and all our businesses are set up to deliver. You know, what's their purpose? What's underlying every other decision that they take? So, I mean, people have been critiquing, and particularly feminists actually, have been critiquing GDP for decades. I mean, there's this very famous speech that Robert Kennedy gave in 1968 where people quote all the time saying, essentially, it was a very poetic speech saying that GDP accounts everything that is, you know, toxic and bad for us, and it doesn't count anything that makes life worthwhile. So this conversation has been rumbling along for a while. Well, an important moment happened in 2009. There was this famous report, the Commission on Societal Progress, or something along those lines, commissioned by Nicolas Sarkozy when he was president of France, with Amartya Sen, Joseph Stiglitz, and Fitoussi, a French economist. And so it really gave a boost to the Beyond GDP movement. And there've been a whole lot of different initiatives, incredibly diversity in how they're done, but the conversation is growing. And I notice now, I don't have to say to people why GDP is bad. Almost that conversation has been won. It's accepted we need a different measure. The now question is, well, what do we replace it with? What do we shift to? A whole lot of basket of different measures, or a new one, which is a much more useful conversation. So I was spending a lot of time thinking about what is it that I can contribute. And I'm very lucky that I work for an organisation that has a huge brand. OXFAM's really well known. And so using that to talk about, from the perspective of development, from the perspective of climate change, why we need to change the economic model, I think creates quite a powerful rationale that people find it quite hard to disagree with. When you talk about global justice, when you talk about people's life chances in some of the poorest parts of the world, it's hard to disagree with the fact that we need to change our economic model. So what I'm really trying to do is help people think differently about the economy, ask different questions, challenge their own assumptions about the way the economy operates. And that, in a practical sense, leads to a lot of writing. I'm trying to work on a book at the moment, and a lot of speaking, and really just trying to go to forums and spaces where people congregate and try to really spur them to look at things differently, and then ask those harder questions, and then think differently about what the economy is all about, what it's for, and is it succeeding in being a little bit more ambitious about what we should ask of the economy. So what I think is really important about gatherings about NESI is, well, one, it adds momentum, it brings enthusiasm, it adds a boost to people's energy, and you can't miss it here. Everyone is so excited, and there's been a lot of amazing, very sort of illuminating conversations, connections being made, sparks flying, and that's really important. But going forward, I think what's really great is that when people see other common projects or like-minded activities, or they can start teaming up on campaigns, because all of us have got a lot on our plate. We're all here because we're active. And I think what's really exciting is the connections that get made at meetings like this, where you get meetings of minds, people can learn from each other, they can piggyback on each other's projects, they can chip in with each other, share lessons, share ideas, and then suddenly we can start cutting to the chase, because we're learning from each other, we're being much more effective in what is ultimately a really hard battle. I think it's been really fun, really fun. It's really well organised, huge diversity of different types of platforms and different types of activities, different tempos of the meetings and the gatherings. I've met some extraordinary people, some real heroes of mine. It's been just amazing to meet people who are really getting their hands dirty in delivering the new economy, rather than just like me, just thinking about it. People actually rolling up their sleeves and getting on and doing it, because they're the sorts of folk that the rest of us need to learn from, and to need to celebrate and really have their backs as well, so they can keep going.